a market, and it will get sold at a market price race. So whoever is the highest bidder will get the oil, and in a lot of cases that would be the UK. So really the UK is losing money. We are losing money by this oil field being instructed. So the second huge consideration is obviously climate. So I won't get into the science tonight. As I'm sure most of you are aware, we've already seen like a massive climate breakdown at 1.2 degrees where we're at now. But if Rosebank gets burnt, it will only add more to that climate breakdown. And Rosebank is so vast that if it comes about, the CO2 would produce more CO2 than 28 low-income countries combined. That's the same CO2 pollution that 700 million people produce in 1 year. And so that means the oil field would completely blow through the UK's carbon budget. It's not at all in line with the UK's own set targets in terms of its climate policy. So yeah, another huge consideration why we have to stop this oil field. The third consideration is cheesy bottoms. You might wonder why. So actually it's the marine impact that the oil field would have. So where it's situated, there's a rich and productive habitat, which is host to sharks and rays and whales, and also this cheesy bottom, so that's the sponge communities. So if an oil spill was to occur, it would hit these protective marine ecosystems, and the oil spills could stretch as far as to the Netherlands and France and would have a massive impact. And the operators that are in charge of this, or that would be in charge of this, have a history of causing oil spills. So that's something we wouldn't want to happen. So in the campaign, we have three main targets. These are the UK government, Equinor, and the Norwegian government. At the moment, while we are still awaiting a decision, we are mainly focusing our efforts on the UK government. That's because they have the power to reject the oil field or approve it. Equinor, as I said before, is a company behind Rosebank. It's majority state-owned by the Norwegian government. And so, yeah, they basically put in the application, and now the UK government has the power to reject or approve. And there's several governmental bodies in that, but the main one is the Department for Energy, Security and Net Zero, also known as DESNZ. They have the formal power to approve this oil field, and Grant Shapps is the energy minister of DESNZ. And so the oil bank of Rosebank is currently on his desk. And yeah, we are waiting for his decision. And with the campaign, we've been planning many actions to speak with him about it. Unfortunately, he's not very responsive. But yeah, I'll get more into our tactics a bit later on. So how do we stop Rosebank? So Rosebank was actually formed originally called Stop Cambo in 2021. And Cambo was an oil field very close to where Rosebank would be as well. The company Shell was behind it, and we started it as a massive coalition made up from different organizations, NGOs, grassroots groups, and individuals all coming together opposing Cambo back then. And there was so much public pressure and scrutiny, and actually produced this controversy, this lightning rod for controversy, that Shell ended up putting out of Cambo. And we are essentially doing the same with Rosebank. We are making sure that government ministers in the streets and in Parliament and events, that they will hear about Rosebank everywhere they go. And we are using a variety of tactics to make this happen. We are meeting with MPs behind the scenes. We are writing to them. We're taking to the streets, organizing demonstrations. We're doing creative actions by going into Equinor offices and staging a knit-in, so literally just knitting in their offices and making sure that we are here and we're not going away. So yeah, political opposition was crucial in stopping Cambo, and we are doing the same. We've already, well, we'll get into more of this, but we've already had political opposition from every major political party in the UK. And we will also raise the financial and reputational stakes for Equinor in Norway. So we're coordinating with campaigners across the world, which very recently we had the AGM, which is the annual general meeting of Equinor. There was protests happening in Argentina, in Norway, in London. And yeah, we coordinated that so that Equinor knows that we are holding them accountable, and we are putting the pressure of them to pull out of these or to stop these projects. And we really want to raise the damage and the profile on Equinor, who likes to pretend that they are a green company. So since we've launched, we've done some major things. We've had 130,000 people come out and say that they don't want this oil field to go ahead. We've had 200 organizations call on Rishi Sunak in an open letter to stop Rosebank. We've had hundreds of scientists and academics oppose Rosebank. And even outside of the UK, we've had members of the European Parliament write to Rishi Sunak saying he cannot let Rosebank go ahead. And you can see a picture of me there, very embarrassing. Here's some evidence of the publications that we have made in the recent months. So, like I said, Rosebank is a vast coalition made up from all different organizations, and we're taking action all across the country. We really encourage people and groups to take actions in their local communities. They can be done completely autonomously. And yeah, it's a really powerful thing to see all these distributed actions all across the country and also in Norway, and having people choose the way they want to take action in their streets. So here you can see some lovely examples of that. Actually, this Saturday, we have a paddle out. So it's also called the Wave of Resistance. Clara will send you some more information on that via email, but it's basically all across the UK, we're going into sea with people that are surfing, swimming, and yeah, it's basically a massive protest against this oil field. And in Norway, we have the snow sport community as well, who has come publicly out against this oil field, because obviously the snow is disappearing in Norway because of the earth heating up. So yeah, it's just another example of all the actions that we're taking across the UK. This is just, again, another example of us being at the Equinor offices, which there's one of them in Aberdeen and one of them in London. And more recently as well, in April, 100,000 people took to the streets in London to protest against new oil and gas. We had a picket outside the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero and spoke to workers and handed out leaflets and really raised the profile on Rosebank and made sure that people knew why it was so bad and why it had to be stopped. So yeah, these are just a few examples as to why we have to stop this oil field, and that the people of the UK do not want this to go ahead. Especially over the last year, we've had 7 million households, 7 million, which is a huge number, being pushed into fuel poverty due to the rising consumer energy prices. And whilst our energy bills have doubled, Equinor, the company behind this, has made record profits. They've made £75 billion in the last year, and that is more than BP and Shell combined. And I want to really stress that our energy bills aren't going to be getting any lower from any new domestic oil and gas. It's all going to be, most of it is going to be exported, and the only real beneficiary of this oil is going to be Equinor and the Norwegian government, who's already, as I'm sure most of you know, is a very wealthy country. So this will do nothing to help people who actually could do with lower energy bills. Yeah, as I mentioned before, we will be accounting for most of the oil field due to a massive loophole in the new oil and gas fields in the windfall tax. So we have an incredibly generous tax system that allows these companies that are already immensely rich to for us to cover their expenses. So, as I said before, we really want to drive political opposition against this oil field, and we've had that happen from every major political party already. We've had over 4,000 people email their MP. We've had it being raised in Prime Minister's questions in the Scottish Parliament, and Labour. Obviously, this was a huge win for us recently. Has publicly come out and said they are committed to blocking all new oil and gas in the North Sea, because they know that it's incompatible with a livable future. And even one Tory MP has come out and said, yeah, Rosebank would not be in line with our net zero targets, which was Chris Skidmore. And this is just another example. Monica Lennon from the Scottish Parliament has said, we also need to halt the project. We are still working on Humza Yousaf as the First Minister of Scotland. Hopefully he will also join the other politicians in coming out against this oil field. So I know that was a whole lot of information, and hopefully you're able to take it all in, but sorry, just, yeah. I don't know if you're able to make it so, yeah, perfect. Yeah, so a whole lot of reasons as to why we have to come together and stop this oil field. And we have seen that public pressure and scrutiny really does work. We've done it with Cambo back in 2021, and we've seen it even last year with another project of Equinor called Wisting in Norway. They had to pull out of that as well because of public pressure. So how do we do this and how can you get involved? So the first and easy step is to just talk to your fellow trade union members about Rosebank and about the impact it would have on our planet. We just want as many people to know about it. I think even though it sometimes feels there is public pressures, there's still so many people that are unaware of this happening. Then you can also sign a petition, which the information will be sent to you via email. You can meet up with your MP and organise a meeting with them. We have a very easy email your MP tool available on our website. And if you're not part of a local climate group already, and you feel like you're ready to join that, then I really encourage you to take action on Rosebank in your own community. So as I stressed before, a decision on Rosebank could come very soon. The government, will probably approve it, knowing this government, any moment. But whatever they do, we will be ready to fight this oil field, because we know that we cannot let it happen. We cannot have any more new fossil fuel projects if we are to live the absolute worst of climate breakdown. But I do want to also stress that whatever the outcome will be, we have to move away in a just way, in a just transition, and it has to be led by oil and gas workers who will be affected by phasing down of fossil fuel jobs. But yeah, I'm sure Rose will get more into that and how we're able to do that. But for my side, this is just a last slide on all the socials that we have, so you can follow us on Stop Cambo, because we're still called Stop Cambo on all the socials, on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. If you want to find out more information, if you want to stay up to date, you can find it all there. And thank you very much for listening. And if you have any questions, please let me know. I'm happy to answer them.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Bibi, for your presentation and sharing all this info. Obviously, we will share all the links and social media and tools and actions after the meeting, but most of them have also been shared in the chat. And I think you've done the perfect transition to the next presentation, which is, Rosemary is going to talk to us about engagement with fossil fuel workers. But there will be opportunity for more like discussions or reflections after Rosemary's presentation. But I'm also going to see if there were a couple of like immediate questions for Bibi that were like burning questions that people would like to ask. I may be able to take a couple. So if you have got a burning question, please do raise your electronic hands, because there's too many people for me to see your real hands. If there is no question immediately, you'll have another chance afterwards to do so. I can actually see somebody raising their non-electronic hand. I've got Dal. Dal, would you like to ask a question? And then I see Barbara as well. So Del, you're going to need to unmute yourself. You first. Go for it. Can you unmute yourself? I tell you what, I'm going to take Barbara while you work out how to unmute yourself. So Barbara, would you like to go first?
Yeah, I'm very concerned that we don't make the same mistake that we made with the miners, where it was essential to close down the mines for all sorts of reasons. But we rather abandoned the miners to just get on with it as best you can and find other employment, mostly. We mustn't do that. But on the other hand, in the desperation to keep their jobs, the men and women working in this field can't keep the gas and oil being looked at, because it'll be the end of the world if they do, the end of everybody. Okay.
Thanks, Barbara, for not your question, your reflection. But yes, that's great. I think, Del, you've managed to unmute yourself. So do you want to go next?
Yeah, I'd like to hear what other people's reaction, especially the more expert people's reaction to something like that. Thank you.
Thank you. So Del, would you like to go next? No.
Del Inspiron, if you'd like to go next, you've got your hand up, we can see you.
Okay. I really want you to come in, but you don't seem to hear us, so I'm going to take Jill next. There's quite a lot of hands, so we'll hear from a few people, and then there will be a chance for more comments after Rosemary's presentation. Jill?
Yeah, can I just ask, and I feel it's something I should know the answer to, because I think I've been heard it before, but there's you mentioned approving oil fields and granting licenses. And just so I can understand exactly what the government, or sorry, what the Labour Party are talking about doing, is that like two stages of things? Is there a risk that they're gonna, that we're hearing one thing and thinking it means more? I'm not sure. What's the difference between approving an oil field and then the granting of the licenses, and how much is already lost? If they're saying, oh, we're going to stick with those that are already approved, is that like lots?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think, so the difference between licenses and approval, so licenses happen, that's the first stage. So for example, Jackdaw is an oil field that was approved last year. There was Shell as well behind that, but they actually got their license in 1970. And so it can take a very long time for these licenses ultimately to be approved. Licenses are granted very easily, whereas approval have to go through the North Sea Transition Authority, and yeah, that happened at a much later stage. But in terms of like what Labour will actually do once they come into power, it's very hard for us to say. We have seen Keir Starmer do so many U-turns already. So I think they have said that includes licenses and approving oil fields, but whether they will actually stick to that, we'll just have to see, hopefully. But a license doesn't mean as much as an approval, if that makes sense.
Thank you, Bibi. I have got 4 people with their hands up. We're gonna take them quite quickly, one after the other, to see if there is direct questions. But please, can you keep it short, because we then want to hear from Rosemary, and there'll be a chance for people to come back after that. So I'm gonna go for Cleland. Kesland, sorry.
My question is about oil and gas workers. Obviously, I'm assuming they're not coming under one union. There's a variety of unions involved in this. What percentage of workers are in what union? What are the viewpoints of union leadership within it? I know these are complex questions and probably people don't have the data, but just things to think about going forward.
Thanks. I think that's a really important point. And yes, they are not all in one union. I mean, RMT and Unite represent offshore workers, but then you've also got different services. around the oil industry. So it'd be like a very interesting mapping exercise. Okay, I'm going to take Les and then Angela.
Yes. Oh, can you see me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. I mean, the first talk described the increasing political support for stopping the new oil and gas installations. Of course, in parallel with the mainstream politics, there are activist groups, most prominently Just Stop Oil, which has tried to use disruptive tactics to advance that demand. What are the prospects or difficulties of disrupting the oil and gas industry at any stage in the production so as to strengthen the demand?
Thank you.
Thank
I'll
you.
let you think about this one, Bibi, and I'm just going to take Angela and Richard and then see what you want to come back with at this stage. Is that all right? So,
Sure.
Angela?
Yeah, sorry, first of all, I'll go and find the link. There is a collaboration of trade unions working across for oil workers. It includes BALPA, the Pilots Union, Prospect, I think the GMB, Unite and the RMT. I'll get people the links. I was just wondering, I think, bearing in mind coming up to the Scottish Parliament elections, bearing in mind, I just thought, is there anything that people can do in Scotland on the ground to put pressure on, at time for either candidates or, is there somewhere we can get a steer on that? In terms of trade unions, I think in terms of what the Labour Party will do, or Keir Starmer, or Anis Sarwar, it's important to be active in your union and to vote in favour of keeping the link with the political fund and put pressure on the Labour Party that way through your union. And a wee quick point, Les had mentioned there about the prospects for disrupting at any stage of the process, and it just highlighting that Extinction Rebellion trade unionists had a really good relationship last year with oil refinery workers at Grangemouth, down at Southampton, but also there was a wildcat strike last year by Unite Construction at Ineos at Grangemouth, and they were at one point, had they not went back in, had actually asked climate activists for help doing things like non-violent direct action, road blocking, whatever. So I think the links are there and it is very positive going forward.
Thank you so much for those really interesting points, Angela. I'll take Richard quickly, then see if Bibi wants to come back, but we'll move to Rosemary next.
Thank you very much. That's a very good report from Rosebank, but my two questions. One is the problems with the Labour Party. To be honest, I just don't trust Starmer and everything at all, that in fact that the approval process hopefully is quite a long process after licensing, but it seems to me that they're going to accept all. They're going to accept it anyway, to be honest. If the license is granted, to be honest, from one thing. The second one is, I wonder if there's any experience from your efforts with Ecuador in terms of a transfer fund at all, in terms of the experience in Norway, whether in fact that they have any kind of funding for paying for the transfer, for the transition process. All right, thank you.
Thank you. Bibi, I'll give you an opportunity to come back on any of the points you want, and then we will introduce Rosemary.
Great, thank you. Yeah, just a quick one about disruption of oil and gas. Yeah, very difficult to do. I know Greenpeace has done some, has mounted some infrastructure of oil and gas before, but in the case of Rosebank, it will be 80 miles of the west of Shetland. So yeah, disrupting that would be incredibly difficult and dangerous. So yeah, just to answer that. And then as with the problems of Labour, Richard, you mentioned, yeah, I mean, I agree. I also personally don't really trust Starmer, but I guess we just have to believe that for now that they stick to their words. And in terms of the fund for just for transition from Equinor's side, I'm not sure about that, but I do know that they currently they invest 0.18% in renewable energy, and the rest is all put in towards fossil fuel. So that's Equinor / the Norwegian government. So I guess if you could call that putting funds towards a just transition, then that's all they're doing.
Thank you so much. And I'm gonna give a last chance to Dal, who is now pleading in the chat, to contribute. And she was going to be the first person I was going to take. So Dal, do you want to make your point briefly?
Hang on, Clara, can I speak? I've had my hand up all meeting. Is it possible?
Well, yes. So I've been calling you before. Your name shows Dal. What is your name?
Oh, I see. Oh no, I'm Eva. That's
Eva. Okay, make your point, Eva, before we move to Rosemary.
Very quickly. Right, I've been speaking to trades councils in Somerset. I'm a Unite and Unison member. Right, what I'm stressing, and to Labour, everybody, is that the brilliant thing about this campaign is that it's win-win solutions, like we do with our employers, yeah? And like, I don't know if it's Richard said, so Stop Oil, everybody's really angry because they can't get to work. They're not angry with the strikers because they know they want more money. So and the knitting is just amazing. Now, I just want to ask you about the Unite and GMB because they don't like it. And yet everything that's been done is brilliant, in terms of involving workers in this process of a just transition. And then the other thing is writing to the MP, because I know often, Bibi, you write to named individuals rather than MP, where you just get a standard letter. So my Tory MP, I don't think he'll give a monkey's, flip. So, but it's still worth it, eh? Writing to the MP and following up. Okay, thanks.
No, yeah, definitely. Just to quickly answer, still write to them. It's still going to remind them. It's still going to raise a profile on Rosebank, even if they don't agree. They'll have to reply to you. So if it just annoys them, that's fine as well. Okay.
Absolutely. And I mean, people have been referring to union responses to the Labour Party announcement that they wouldn't authorize new license in the North Sea. And we've seen Unite has had quite a balanced response, actually, focusing on the need for a just transition, workers and their union to be involved in the details plan rather than just announcements, whereas GMB has, been like really vocal about we need more oil and gas for the long term, and it's quite different positions. However, what we all agree on is that those fossil fuel workers need to be a fully part of the process, be part of the design of a just transition. And I'm really now pleased to introduce Rosemary Harris. Rosemary is a just transition campaigner at Platform. She spent the last 2 years organizing with climate campaigners, unions and offshore oil and gas workers to build the first workers-led plan for a just energy transition. And Rosemary is one of the authors of the resulting report called Our Power. So Rosemary, I'm now going to pass on the mic to you and hear your contribution, please.
Yeah, thanks, Clara. I'm just going to share my screen, and apologies if you hear whining in the background. There is a dog who wants attention at my feet. I've forgotten how to view. There we go. Yeah, and just quickly before I start, to just come in on the Unite GMB stuff. I think that it can be really easy to feel lost in the weeds of wanting everything that we want. But I think that I was talking to one of the other people that wrote this report a couple of days ago, and actually Unite's response is so far from where it would have been a year, 2 years ago, and is actually quite a momentous change in tact from them. And I think GMB are looking much more isolated, and I'm trying to take heart from that. But yeah, so I am over the last 2 years I've been working with offshore workers and unions, and So this was a joint campaign between Platform, which is a small climate justice organisation, and Friends of the Earth Scotland, to create basically a set of offshore worker-led demands for a just energy transition. I thought, like, in terms of understanding kind of how we can do this kind of work and what it means, I just kind of go through like the process and some of the like principles that we put behind it and kind of where we see it going. So the kind of context of the work is that in 2019, Sea Change was published by Platform and OCI and Friends of the Earth Scotland, which basically called for no new licenses and did some like very initial analysis of jobs. And it looked at the fact that with the right policies, for every 3 jobs created out of the transition, only 1 would be at risk. And so it's kind of set the stage for a different way of talking about phasing out oil and gas. And then during the pandemic, we did a survey of over 1,000 offshore workers, many of whom had been made redundant. So about 40% of the offshore workforce was laid off during the pandemic. 91% of them had never heard of a just transition, but 81% of them were open to leaving the industry, and more than 50% were interested in working in renewables. And what we kind of found from that was that they were really open to talking about things that were going on, and that a lot of their struggles were kind of they're rooted in like union struggles. They're rooted in power and being screwed over, and their concerns about like what comes next. And it's not a kind of deep rooted like hatred of the idea of phasing out oil and gas. It's like kind of rooted in fear. And so one of the things we kind of first tried to do was create this kind of offshore training passport, which was to try and overcome some of the issues of training between offshore oil and gas and offshore renewables not being transferable, even though they're quite transferable skills. And part of that was because it makes a material difference, and part of that was because as climate organizations, we kind of wanted to do an act of like good faith and be like, we're going to do the things that we said we're going to do, even though kind of they don't sit within this like big conversation about like climate change that you think is the only thing we care about, I guess. And then we started building towards, after that, the like big piece of work that we've just come out with. And I think that kind of one of the big principles that we tried to stick to was kind of, we need to phase out fossil fuels rapidly to keep within our fair share of 1.5, and any transition for that needs to be planned by the workers and communities who'll be most impacted, but also that we'll frame the work in that context, but we're not asking the workers to speak out for the need for it. We're not asking them to advocate for phase out or for an end to oil and gas now, because that's not where they are, and it's not actually the thing that they need to be doing. And what they need to be doing is building the transition that we need, so that when we win that bit, we can start building towards the transition. So it's about respecting the privacy, dignity, and autonomy of the people and groups that we worked with, letting conversations and discussions be shaped with workers and led by them as far as possible. And then also looking at kind of a diversity of experience, values, and political ideology as an important part of the process, but holding kind of red lines on issues of racism and sexism and discrimination, which was quite a big talking point before we started, but actually didn't end up being a problem. So that was nice. So the process, we went through 6 workshops across Newcastle, Aberdeen, and Edinburgh, which is kind of where there's a lot of offshore workers. And we paid them for their time. And they were kind of 4-hour workshops when we provided lunch. And it led to 10 draft demands, which were then sent back to attendees who could kind of say that they agreed with them. We had quite a range of participants in terms of how long they'd been offshore and the department that they worked in, just to kind of try and get as much of an idea as possible. Those 10 demands then went out to over 1,000 offshore workers, and over 90% supported the full set of demands. With then kind of, if they didn't support all of them, they were able to pick the ones they did support, to give us like an idea of where there's more and less support, but all of them had over 90% individually. That's just a map that shows the kind of distribution. And also, yeah, about 60% of the people who we engaged with were union members. We got a lot of access through RMT, which kind of skewed to then kind of the union members towards RMT. But for the person who was asking about unionization, the biggest offshore one is RMT. Unite is also quite big. GMB has a lot of onshore workers and very little offshore representation. And so basically, and RMT are like fairly on side now. So Unite are the next big fish, or the biggest fish, I suppose, either way. So these are the demands that came out. They went from kind of the nuts and bolts of a transition. So having workers at the center, having clear accessible pathways out of the jobs, a good training regime, investment in like domestic manufacturing. Then kind of our rights, which is kind of a lot about like what unions would be fighting for. So collective bargaining, universal rights and a wage floor, whistleblowing procedures, health and safety, stuff that basically makes the jobs good and safe. And then the kind of more radical bit, which was like cool to get to, public ownership for public goods, reorganizing the tax system for public goods, and no community left behind, which is kind of the bit that puts it back into how do we care for the workers in the transition, but also make sure that, like, for example, the community of Aberdeen isn't left decimated, and that it's just that all those workers get jobs, but those jobs happen elsewhere and people are left picking up the pieces. It's kind of, I guess, unsurprisingly, the demand 8 and 9, so around public ownership and the tax system, were probably the like individually most contentious, but still had over 90% support. And so then kind of having gone through all of that and doing all of that work, like what comes next? So we're keeping up the pressure in the campaign for an offshore training passport, which is kind of the first big demand that we had. We're working, so in light of Labour's announcement that Bibi mentioned, we're kind of trying to support them in the things that sit underneath that, being really solid just transition policies, and everything that's in the report is kind of costed and quite policy driven. And so it's kind of supporting them to be able to say really confidently, like, if we're going to phase out oil and gas, we're going to have a publicly funded retraining guarantee, and it's going to cost us this much. And that kind of moves, and I think that that moves that kind of conversation into like quote unquote like mainstream like formal politics in a way that it hasn't been properly yet. So it's kind of continuing to do that, increase awareness kind of across the climate and like worker movements around just transition. There's work around, yeah, like motions in local branches of trade unions, but also constituency party branches, particularly Labour. There's a general election. That's an opportunity. Then there's like the bigger questions of, yeah, how do we build on strikes in quite a disparate workforce? A lot of the workers that we spoke to commented on this idea that they're like purposefully individualized and put in situations where it's impossible for them to think more than about 3 weeks in advance, because that's how long they go offshore for. And that's often how long they know they're going to be offshore for, because they're all on very, well, about 75% of them are on very precarious contracts. So they're constantly only thinking in the short term, and it's really difficult for them to imagine building power and imagine them kind of taking that on. And then, as kind of was mentioned, there isn't like an obvious place for a picket line, because most of them go offshore to work from Aberdeen, but then they immediately go home. And that home often isn't Aberdeen, and it isn't in the places where they're not working. So it's quite hard to kind of visibilize that workforce. And then there's the kind of continued work of countering the media and industry and government narrative of fossil fuels being what we need for jobs. And I think that that's kind of what we've seen come out in the last couple of weeks really strongly, is that that's still the way that it's being pitched. And we kind of want this work to contribute and be helpful in kind of arguing against that and saying it's not about you're not protecting jobs if the jobs are bad, and you're laying people off, and you're just delaying the inevitable, and the workers have a plan. They're not worried about this if you just do the things that they're asking. So yeah, I think that's the end of my presentation. It is. Yeah, so I tried to go through that like quite quickly, because there's like a load of detail and it's hard to know what is helpful for people and what isn't. So yeah, really happy to like take questions, and I'll try and answer them if that's helpful, if I can.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Rosemary. I mean, this is like one of the best pieces of work that I've seen for a number of years. So, you know, thank you so much for sharing with us. And I think it complements well what we've just heard about campaigning to stop Rosebank. So yeah, we're gonna like take some questions for Rosemary. We are also like opening up for, you know, reflection, and, you know, Bibi will have a chance to come back on some of the comments, but, you know, maybe to start with, if there are like immediate questions for Rosemary about the piece of work before we sort of widen the discussion. And I've got Judy first.
Hi, thanks very much for that. It was very interesting. I'm a member of Unite community, so I was very interested to hear that you feel, Rosemary, encouraged that Unite is moving in the right direction. And also, I think you said that they're the union you want to work with next. And I just wondered what contacts you've got already within Unite, and also whether you're aware of Unite community, because we're a branch that exists across the country of people who aren't currently in work. So a lot of us are retired, but a lot of people who can't work are either between jobs or disabled or carers or whatever. And from what I've seen across our region, we'd be very much behind what you're trying to do. And I know we've had discussions in our branch about wanting to try and develop more links. It's quite hard for us to get the links with the industrial sector, but if there's any way we could sort of support that bottom up, whatever you're doing. Yeah, I'd just be interested to know how far you've got with it, and just to let you know really that we exist and we might be able to work together going forward.
Thank you so much, Judy. And community branches in Unite are fantastic. You know, they represent people who are not in work, and they are all over the countries, great campaigners and very dedicated to climate justice. So Rosemary, would you like to come back on this?
Yeah. I've sort of been aware of Unite community, but like not really detailed, so that was really helpful actually, thank you. I think that, so we're in a bit of a kind of reflective stage of the work, having published the report a few months ago and like kind of plotting next steps. So Unite Scotland signed on to it as kind of they put their logo on the report, so that was like quite big moves, and we've got contacts kind of in TUC and STUC and a few people across Unite Scotland. I think Unite UK, I guess, Big Unite, I don't really know how we refer to it, a little bit less so, but I think that we're kind of in the process of working out what it looks like to make that next push. But I think that like, yeah, I feel like the messaging that Sharon Graham put on Twitter, which was basically like, we need a worker-led, like fine, but we need a worker-led transition, which it wasn't fine, it was, you're missing detail, we need a worker-led transition, we need the money, and we need to look at public ownership, is sort of like, that's pretty good. And yeah, it's about like, I think going from the bottom up and the top down, and I don't quite know how we do that yet. So yeah, any thoughts, very welcome, because Unite is very big and I am very small.
Thank you so much, Rosemary. I've got a couple of more hands, but I am gonna, you know, make a contribution and, you know, an offer as well, because I'm one of the founder of the Unite Grassroots Climate Justice Caucus, which is a new group of Unite members, less than a year old, Unite members across all sectors who want to make a difference in our union sort of like policies, because at the moment we still support fossil fuels and new fossil fuels. And there's also a lot of other policies that are problematic when it comes to climate justice, such as support for airport expansions or reliance on carbon capture and storage. So, the Grassroots Climate Justice Caucus is a rank and file group of people organizing. And we've got, I'm really pleased to announce that we actually got a motion table at the Unite Policy Conference, which is taking place in Brighton in July, focusing on opposing new fossil fuel infrastructures. And in parallel, there is another motion that talks about using workers' assemblies to really ensure that there is a wide input from members and reps, rather than, officials leading on the climate justice work in Unite. And another little piece of information is that up to December, there was an official body in Unite called the Unite Environmental Task Force that was mainly made of trade union national officials, researchers, education officers, and then nobody knew how you got on this body or how you put anything on the agenda. Recently, it's been sort of paused, and it seems that there is a reflection inside Unite, sort of like higher hierarchy about, how they take this work forward. So I think like the next months are going to be quite interesting. And if you are Unite members, please definitely join the Grassroots Climate Justice Caucus to help us, sort of like organize. We've got months to, get as many Unite members behind our motion at conference. And also, I'm sure that we'll be happy to link with platform, and we've got community members as well as industrial branch members, but not many, if any, offshore workers, I'm afraid. So yeah, that was like my sort of like point of information, and I've got 3 hands up. So I'm going to take Ken, and then Sasha, and then Richard. So Ken.
Thank you, Clara. I thought that was a very interesting talk, and I'm full of admiration for the way that the organisers got to enough offshore workers to do some really useful research and get some useful feedback. I'm a secretary of a trade union council, and the trade union council is Blackpool, Farden Wire, and they're all over the country, and they're one place that the various unions come together. So that, we've got a problem of lots of different unions involved. Trades councils are one place, they do come together. But in the report, clearly, when the workers came from the rigs, they were then spreading all over the country. They were coming from different places. So my question is really, is there a role for trade union councils, given that they're local and they're perhaps like mine in Blackpool and the Fylde Coast, or is it not possible because the workers involved are spread out too thinly over a very large number of local areas?
Thanks, Ken. I think that's a really good point. And, for people who don't know trades councils, they are, the TUC in the community, and local branches across the country affiliate to their local TUC or local trades councils. And they've been like very ahead of their time when it comes to climate justice, sort of like opposing fracking at the very beginning of the campaign. And it definitely be a good place to take, the report and the presentation, Rosemary. But did you want to come back on that specifically, or should I take a couple more?
I can give it a quick go. I think like the short answer is I'm not 100% sure. The longer answer is that I think that it might be that it's hard to do specifically like offshore stuff, but I think that part of what we hope this report does is show that it's possible to create this kind of like momentum in a high carbon industry that seems very intractable. So I think that like there will always be, wherever you are, some kind of industry that like is feeling that pinch, because ultimately like everyone is transitioning. And it also forms quite a like maybe helpful basis to discuss like the idea of just transition and how you frame that in a way that works for other people. So I guess like it might not be that it might be that actually it's really great and you can do it if you have like one excited offshore worker, but I think that it can also be like just a good starting point for those conversations. Also, Ken, it looks really nice wherever you are.
Excellent. And I think it may be an idea to train a number of trade unionists to be able to do a short presentation about the report, so we can cover a number of trades councils, because there's so many across the country. It's probably not possible for Rosemary and her colleagues to cover all of this. Okay, I'm going to take
and in
Sasha.
response to what she said, we're in the Blackpool area. As you know, it's always sunny in Blackpool. Plenty of solar energy here, and we're enjoying it at the moment.
And you've stopped fracking as well. Okay, I'm going to take Sasha next.
Okay, hi, thank you. It's a really interesting meeting. My name's Sasha Ismail. I work for Safe Landing, which is an aviation workers organisation. I'm not an aviation worker. But I have three questions, one to do with the Labour Party, one to do with your consultation process, and one to do with the RMT. So one on the Labour Party is, you mentioned trying to organise in constituency Labour parties. How much of a network of Labour Party people do you have working on this? That's the first question. Second question is, it seems like you did quite well involving offshore workers in your focus groups. How many were involved, and could you say a bit more about the process of how you got them involved, and what you did and so on? And lastly, on the RMT, you said the RMT is on board, but at the I remember reading, and I just checked it, at the 2019 RMT AGM, a motion about just transition, and specifically referring to the offshore industry, was voted down, and after their general secretary opposed it. Now, that was Mick Cash. They do have a new general secretary since then. So I wondered, is your assessment the RMT has shifted for the better since 2019? Thanks.
Okay, so 3 questions for the price of 1. Thanks, Sasha. It was a bit noisy where you were, but hopefully, Rosemary, you've heard some of that. And also, I just want to say, Bibi, if there are like questions that you want to come back to, specifically, just wave. But I'll give you a chance to come back as well in a minute. Rosemary.
So on the first question about Labour, we haven't massively, that bit of work is more of a thing that we're thinking about. If I'm honest, it hasn't started yet. And it would be a bit of work that we thought about how it would be organized, and it wouldn't be me doing it because I don't have the connections and I don't have the time, because that's a full-time job. But it's something, I guess, as we look towards planning in a general election, kind of how do we engage with that is something that we're thinking about. Second question, I can very briefly speak to some more of what we did. Also, though, what I would say is we have you go to Faux, I'll put it in the chat. Basically, it's the Faux Scotland website, and we've got a 10-page methodology, which goes into excruciating detail about everything that we did. And we would just love if someone read it, because we were like, this will be super helpful. And then we wrote it and we were like, who's going to read this? But it's nicely designed. So, and I think it goes into some of what we did and some of the mistakes that we made, which I think maybe is quite helpful. But basically, it was 2 years of we did a survey offshore that got 1,000 responses, and we called every single person who did that survey and spoke to them, and then worked out who was excited about it, took people to meetings with MPs, and just slowly built more and more contacts, went up to Aberdeen loads. Our relationship with RMT was really helpful. We would kind of travel really far to go to one meeting with a worker, and we're able to kind of try and take the pressure off of having to achieve something really big every time we met someone. And I'm really happy to, if it's helpful, I'm conscious that I could go on for ages about this. So if you have a look at the methodology, I'm really helpful to have a more in-depth meeting to talk about some of the methodology stuff, because it may be that is helpful. On RMT, yes, they have so we worked very closely with Jake Malloy, who has now retired, but he started OILC, which was the Radical Offshore Workers Union, which then merged with RMT and became RMT OALC, which is the offshore branch of RMT, for people who don't know. He's just retired in May, but he basically, through the work, Gabby, who until very recently worked at Platform and was instrumental in this work, like she basically persisted really hard with him and had a lot of conversations about it, and kind of like through building that relationship we managed to kind of like win him on side. And I think that he then became like a really, really strong advocate within RMT for the work, and he got RMT to sign on to the report. And I think that like I think we were a bit nervous because he's retired and someone new has come in, and I can't remember their name, and we don't really know anything about them. They're a bit of like an unknown quantity, and they're not from the offshore sector, and maybe that's a good opportunity. But yeah, so I think they have moved a lot. I think there's still obviously like a lot of internal politics, but like, and I'm sure that there are many people within RMT that we'd still come up against and find it difficult, but like there was definitely quite a big movement between 2019 and 2023. I think that answered all the questions.
Thank you so much, Rosemary. And I mean, just to say that I had a plan to have some breakout rooms originally, but you know, I'm flexible depending of, you know, how people are interested, because there've been a lot of, you know, contribution and really interesting point that I think everybody wanted to hear. You know, I'm carrying on with that, and we won't have time to go into breakout room. Some of you will be delighted because I know some people don't like breakout rooms, but I'm going to carry on taking, you know, I've got a couple more hands up. I've also shared in the chat, and that will be circulated afterwards, a link to a short film that's really interesting about 3 oil workers speaking to each other about their unions and climate change. One from the US, one from Norway, one from Nigeria, which is done by one of my friends, Vivian Price, who I think is here, and maybe she'll tell us a little bit about her experience in working with unions internationally, you know, representing oil workers. No pressure, Vivian, but if you want, you'll have a space to do so. Okay, Graham, you haven't spoken yet, so I'll bring Graham, and then Richard, I'll bring you back.
Okay, thanks, Clara. Yeah, just wanted to say something about, you know, when Starmer pitched up at GMB conference, he did offer up a bit of an easy target by not actually having any kind of just transition plan in place. And of course, you know, that point's been made very well by Unite too. But what he did say was that he's going to present next week some green prosperity plan. And I think what would be important for people at this meeting to liaise on is to interrogate that plan when it comes out next week sometime. I haven't got a date for it unless anyone else on this meeting has. But as soon as it comes out, we do need to examine it very closely, because of course it's something he should have had in place before he went along and made a statement like that. The Labour Party has got a Just Transition Commission with trade union members on it, including Unite, but as far as I know, it hasn't met or met very infrequently. So that would have been, you know, it has got this structure, and that would have been one option for actually coming up with some kind of clear plan for how he was going to make sure that social justice and a just transition was embedded in this particular industrial strategy.
Well, thanks, Graham, for this insight. I mean, I think this is quite a significant development, certainly moving in the right direction. You know, it's a pity that it didn't start 5 years ago, but here we are where we are. So that's you know, a positive development, but we'll see where that goes. Richard, do you want to ask your question, make your contribution?
Yeah, yeah. I'm also a Trades Council Secretary for East Anglia in East Anglia. So obviously it's the renewables, centre of renewables down here. But what my question was, a bit concerning about the fact there seems to be we're making a comment on the recent reply, there's no contact with maybe Norwegian activists putting pressure on Equinor, considering it's a publicly owned company, that in fact that they should be, I mean, they have their own workers, surely they must have a climate change commitment themselves from that area. And I'd have thought there'd be some leverage which we could do through them. But secondly, my question is really on the passport and whether in fact where we do have recognised unions negotiating in the oil industry, whether in fact that the passport and job and wage guarantee should be certainly on part of the collective bargaining process in terms of when they come to negotiation. So that's a question that may be something which could be brought up at the Unite conference, or I haven't read the motion which is going towards the policy conference, but certainly I would have thought that this should be top of the agenda, any kind of any collective bargaining where a union has recognition. So ringing off now, Richard. Thank you.
No, thanks, Richard. I mean, this is a good point, whether or not, that particular point can be made at conference. There is a number of motions around climate justice, including some on just transitions. So if we don't identify enough delegates, that we'll make sure we try to make that point. Yeah, I'm just gonna see if Bibi, would you like to come back to anything that you've heard so far, and maybe like the comment about Norwegian campaigners, and then I'll bring back Rosemary once again, and I think then Vivian may want to say a few words as well. So Bibi?
Yeah, I actually just put it in the chat, but yeah, we are actually working with Norwegian activists in Norway, including, I guess this is more of an NGO type, but Greenpeace Norway, there's Grandparents for Climate Change Norway, and we recently had an action outside the Equinor office, which consisted only of Norwegian activists in Stavanger, I can never say it properly, during their AGM. So I've included the Friends of the Earth Scotland, who's also in the Stop Rosebank coalition. I've included the article so you can see who's part of that, but we are working with Norwegian activists.
Thank you so much. Rosemary, would you like to come back to any of the points or questions that were made lately?
Yeah, I'm gonna be totally honest, is that I missed a little bit of it because this guy was barking. So I wasn't 100% able to hear. But I think that there was a question about the training passport, I think.
Yeah.
And I think this may not be answering the question, and sorry if that's the case, but it's something that the unions have actually been pushing on for years and years, basically, this problem with training recognition. And basically there's a lot of difficulties around everything is a private company. Everyone is sort of 3 levels down from working for the owner of the asset, and then the owner of the asset is the person setting it's all just very, very intractable. And then also there's, Jesus Christ, sorry. And then there's also basically there's some collective bargaining that exists for certain things offshore, but because of the way that things have been broken down offshore, it can be quite difficult to bargain, and because most of the workforces aren't core crew, and they're not static, so they don't stay in the same place for very long, it's difficult to build up that sort of workforce solidarity. What's your problem? Oh God, sorry. Okay, I'm going to stop talking for a second.
No, that's great. And it has been quite a long meeting, and some people are starting to leave, so we're going to move to towards wrapping down this session. But yeah, I was wondering, Vivian, because you are a former workers on refinery, although I think it was in the construction sector. But would you like to just share a little bit of your experience now as a researcher and filmmakers, and having to worked with some oil workers, maybe some of the barriers and difficulty, and what resonated with you at that meeting, at this meeting?
Yes, thanks so much for the opportunity, Clara. And I really enjoyed both presentations from Bibi and Rosemary, and the report from Our Power is extremely good, very detailed, and I've been sending it to everybody I know here in the States, because of course this is a global problem. And I did work in a refinery for 3 years as a maintenance electrician. I know it's good money, and the problem is that most work is undervalued. So it's understandable that workers don't want to lose good paying jobs with good benefits, even if they have relatively, unsafe conditions. And also, I think a lot of workers are uneasy about the impact of climate change. The short film that I made really came out of this series of interviews and focus groups with Norwegians, Nigerians, and US workers, some Canadians, about their ideas about labor conditions where they work and their feelings about their industry. And a lot of times workers do identify with their employer rather than, as a union member, because they're afraid of the future. But I think it's very important to hear about these dialogues that are taking place between environmentalists and workers, between community members and workers, because we have to break out of our silos. In my work in the Talking Union, Talking Climate, the US and Norwegian workers were agreed on a lot of things, but they did have disagreements. And then they listened to the Nigerian worker. And of course, right now in Nigeria, there's a huge upheaval because of the removal of fuel subsidies. It's a understanding what's happening in the global South as well, in terms of oil exploration, the role of Equinor, and Shell, etc., and how they manipulate the governments as well as the prices of oil. I mean, it's a very, it's a complex situation, but I think the more we demystify it and really bring things out in the open, the better it is. So thank you so much for the work that you're doing.
Brilliant. Thanks, Vivian. And I think thank you as well for, bringing the issue of Global South, which is really important. And, Bibi and I have been working together on the Stop ECOP campaign, which is the East Africa crude oil pipeline, working with, frontline communities and groups in Uganda and Tanzania, opposing this infrastructure. And as you can imagine, in Uganda and Tanzania, being a climate protester is a much more difficult job even than in the UK. And also, there are a lot of, controversy around jobs. So, similar issues. And I'm doing a bit of work trying to engage with trade unions in the area to look at the possibility of bringing together alternatives around the idea of climate job for East Africa. And so, yeah, thank you for, bringing the Global South in, which we should always mention when we discuss climate justice. Okay, we've only got a few minutes left, and I can see Keslan. Sorry, Keslan, I can never pronounce your name, and I've seen you in a few meetings now, so yeah. I should really know what you're doing. But would you like to have the last word?
No, I want Del to have the last word. She can't raise her electronic hand, so I was raising it on her behalf.
Oh, thank you so much. So it's not Del, it's Eva.
Yeah.
Eva, would you like to come back?
The Clark's dispute was very, very visual. What they did, they stood in by a roundabout, by Sainsbury's, everywhere. So try and summarise, right? So we did solidarity hours, right, where Labour parties and TUCs in Somerset would come. They had a massive demonstration through a sleepy village of street, and bystanders were clapping because they were members of the family of Clark's workers or friends, and it forced the Chinese billionaire, multi-billionaire, to rush from Tokyo to negotiate. So regarding fire and rehire, Barry Gardner, the MP, came and spoke to convince them to go on strike for 8 solid weeks. We also set up a strike fund. Paul Novak from the TUC came. But to try and sum it up, regarding offshore workers in Aberdeen, they'll have lots of families and whatever, you know, there. And I'm just wondering, could they stand at a roundabout or somewhere with, you know, bystanders and so on? And the clerks workers won, but that, you know, didn't appear in the media, of course, too inspiring. So, and also the community union, he tried to take everything off them, you know, the billionaire. So they went back to the workers and said, what are you prepared to keep? Right. So they said free coffee breaks, forget it. They wanted to keep the rate of pay because they were worried about losing their homes, really. They couldn't afford it. So yeah, that's what they went for. So I think it was reputational damage that made the billionaire come and negotiate. So I'm just wondering whether that might be one way into it. And then just finally, the nuclear industry, Hinkley Point in Somerset. There are young stewards turning up to the Trades Council in Bridgewater, representing 4,000 union members at Hinkley Point. And I just wondered what people thought about the nuclear industry. Thank you, Chair. Clara.
Thank you so much, Eva. And I guess I'm not going to open up the debate about the nuclear industry 5 minutes before to close the meeting, because we could be there for the next 2 hours. But certainly, you know, that's a trade union briefing that we could look at running in the future, because it comes back again in many spaces, and it's a very difficult conversations to have with many trade unionists. So, you know, thanks for all your points. But I've only got 4 minutes to conclude this meeting. So, you know, I'm going to leave it there. And, you know, I really want to thank our two speakers, Bibi and Rosemary, for their excellent presentation. And also, you know, coming back to so many questions for much longer than anticipated, because we didn't have any breakout session. In the chat, I'm just going to put what we call a Jamboard. And I am going to just like share my screen for 1 minute to explain what a Jamboard is and just show you how it works. But that was something we were going to use into the breakout rooms. And that's something you could do now, but I will also circulate the link to the Jamboard so you can do it at later stage. But there's 4 pages in this Jamboard. And the first thing that I was going to ask people to do, we haven't really got time to do it right now, is for people to make a commitment to yourself about what you're going to do next. So what next step can you take to disseminate this information that we shared today? And, you know, it can be what you're going to do next, where you're going to take the motions, you know, what resource you may look into, who you may contact, etc., etc. So, you know, if you get a chance at the close of the meeting, please do that, but I will circulate it afterwards. The way you use the Jamboard is that you go on the left-hand side and you select a sticky note here. And then you can write, you know, Clara, I will talk to Aberdeen TUC. And that's my commitment. You can even choose the color under which you do it. You save it and it goes on the Jamboard. So you can just like resend that. The question that we were going to look at in the breakout rooms were, you know, how we can support those offshore striking workers. And I think some suggestions were made already by a couple of people, you know, how we engage conversation with them on just transition, including on our power report. Also thinking about who do we speak to, you know, who is it we should be contacted? Is there like local group, organization, trade union bodies, trade council that, you know, we should contact? And finally, also how we can increase trade union involvement in the Stop Rosebank campaign. So obviously we didn't have time to do so, but there will be some homework for everybody after the briefing. And so hopefully there'll be some of you who take the time to share your ideas, because, you know, the more people put their brain together, the better. So after this briefing, we will circulate the recording, the resources, including a number of films, the model motions, details of actions that have been mentioned, and reports and articles. And yeah, we will then analyze if we get anything on the Jamboard to think about the next steps. So we will keep in touch with you. You're now on the mailing list of the tipping point trade union briefing. So we will find ways to continue those conversations in different spaces. And before I close this meeting, I see Rosemary, you have your hand up, so I will give you the last words.
I think that the offshore worker strikes may have been suspended for tomorrow. Just as a piece of information, I'm not 100% sure, but RMT said that they've suspended them to consider an offer. So I don't know if Unite have.
Yes, so Angela shared this information in the chat earlier on as well.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. I think I wanted to come back to this. And the information that she shared is that the contractor who worked for Billfinger, so there were around 600 Billfinger contractors in different companies. And so I think it's just the Billfinger contractors that, are considering the offer, but there was also 650 Stark offshore members and 200 offshore workers employed by Sparrows. So it may be that only part of the workers will not go on strike, but difficult to see. I was tweeting Unite and RMT today to find out more. I'm sure that there will be more information coming up really soon. But thank you so much, everybody. That's been a fantastic conversation and hopefully only the start of this conversation. We need trade unionists to engage more in those campaigns to prevent new fossil fuel infrastructures. We can bring really good points because we have got those links with trade union workers, and we should have more of those collaboration. Hopefully this is just the beginning. Have a good evening, everybody. Take care.
Thanks, Clara.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks, Laura.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Till next time. Goodbye.